Hey folks, this time I wanted to do something a little more practical. This is going to be a shop project. Particularly this is a sanding block, and I've got a couple of these that I have used quite extensively for woodworking, and what I wanted to do this time was create some of these that are a little smaller than this one so that I can get down inside boxes and things and do a little bit more sanding. These kinds of shop projects are really practical, but they also offer an opportunity for you to get a little creative with them if you want and to try some new things. So let's take a look at this first and see how the sanding block is put together. There's a wing nut on top, right? And that comes off eventually, if I can get it out of there, right? So pull this up. You can see there's a hole through there, and then the sandpaper just wraps around that. And the bottom has some cork on it that kind of helps pad things. So let's figure out how we're going to build this. So let's start with the top first, right? So I need a piece of wood, and I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. So my final wood piece is going to be about 2 by 3. So what I'm looking for is something a little closer to like this, right? So if I'm looking down, straight down at this, I know I'm going to need a pocket cut here, the circle. I'm going to need one cut that'll drill straight through for my 1/4 inch bolt to fit. Other than that, this is just a rectangle. I'm going to use 3/4 wood for this, and that should give us enough height to where it's something I can grab on and sand with, but not so obnoxious that it makes things a little bulky or hard to handle. Now on the bottom piece, you'll notice we've got this channel here, all right? So if we look from the side, we've got a channel, and originally I had cut 2 separate pieces of wood for this, but since we have a CNC machine, we don't necessarily need to do that anymore. We can go ahead and just cut a pocket all the way through here, like this. And that will give us our little risers on the side where our block will fit in. The other thing we've got to do is cut another piece straight down through the center that matches up with this. And there's something that you can't see on this, and that's that for these I use a 1 inch bolt, right? So there is a hex head bolt on the other side of this. So we'll need to be able to at some point flip this and cut the hex pattern up here so that our bolt sits down flush inside of it. So when I'm working on something like a box with these sanding blocks, or typically when I'm working on anything, I tend to go through grits, 4 grits, 120, 220, 320, and 400. And each one of those grits is progressively finer, right? And what that means is I really end up with a nice finish on the boxes. I start with 120, then I go 220, 320, 400. And I work my way through all of those, just sanding things down. It gives a really nice finish on stuff like this. So what that means is I'm going to go ahead and create 4 of these tiny sanding blocks. And I'm also going to do something a little different than I did with this one. I'm going to go ahead and V-carve on each one of the blocks what type of sandpaper I want on it. So that way I can have 4 of them set up at one time, and I can just immediately grab them and go, okay, this is 120, this one's 220, this one's 320, and so on. It's just a nice handy way to have everything set up to begin with. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get a measurement on our stock, right? That's the first thing we do when we set up any file in Carbide Create. So we've got a length of about 6 3/4 and a width of about 5 inches. And when it comes to measuring the thickness of the wood, I always use a set of dial calipers, just so much better for accuracy. And the dial calipers say 9.85. So that's what we're going to set the thickness of our lumber at, and we're going to start our positioning from this bottom left corner. So once we've got all that set up, we can move on to designing. Okay, and starting with our design, let's take a look at this again. We're going to do the bottom piece first. And we've got here two rectangles, the one going around the outside and then another one going on the inside that will create these two rails for us. Now, we've decided that our outside is going to be 2 by 3 inches. And I got this by trying a couple of test blocks and just sort of seeing how things felt in my hands. But that gives me a really good size for this. So our outside will be a rectangle 2 inches by 3 inches. Now for this inside piece, I want each one of these rails to be about 1/4 inch thick, right? So to do that, 1/4 inch, that's a 1/2 inch total. I'm going to make this inside piece, I'm going to make it 1.5 by 3. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and extend that a bit, because otherwise when the bit gets into this corner here doing the pocket, it's going to curve in and we're going to end up with like a little nubbin here. So I'm going to extend that out a little further so that the bit cuts completely at a nice parallel angle here and we don't have to carve anything extra out. So I'm going to extend this out on both sides, and that way our bit will cut completely. And that will be for our pocket pass. Now the last thing we need to cut is a hole for this guy. And I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch bit, and I'm going to make this hole a little bit larger than 1/4 inch. That way we can use the 1/4 inch bit and the system won't complain about it. If you try and cut a 1/4 inch, exactly 1/4 inch hole with a 1/4 inch bit, it will not let you. It assumes that that is too small, so you need to make it just slightly bigger in order to drill a hole straight down that's approximately 1/4 inch. Okay, now the same way we did for our bottom board, this is our top board that I've made a composite out of maple and bloodwood that we're going to use to create our top piece like this. So I need to get measurements for this, and we'll set up our file in Carbide Create. And this one is 10 inches by about 4 3/4. And again, use the dial calipers for thickness. Okay, that looks like 0.68, sorry. Okay, so now that we've got our sizing on this piece and we've set everything up in Carbide Create, we need to create the shapes that we need for this top piece. Now we have a rectangle going around the side, and we know that that rectangle needs to fit into our bottom piece. So I'm going to go ahead and make that rectangle roughly the same size, but it's going to be a little bit narrower along this length, so that piece will sit down inside and the sandpaper will then wrap around and have a place to go underneath that. So that'll be just a hair narrower than that. So now that I've got this rectangle piece, I need to create myself a pocket here. This pocket is what allows the wing nut to sit down in there and not hit your hand when you're using the sanding block. So we create that circle here, and one thing to note on the depth for this, I go ahead and just measure the wing nut itself, and the wing nut itself is about a 1/2 inch, so I know that this pocket needs to go down a 1/2 inch in order for that wing nut to clear and not hurt your hand. So the last thing that has to be done is we cut a hole here in the center, and that's where our bolt is going to come up in the middle. And those two pieces have to line up, which is easily done just by centering everything on the rectangles. Okay, so now that we've got our basic design down and everything is lined up on this rectangle, so we know everything's going to be centered up and it fits really nicely on this piece, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this 4 times, and that'll make sure that it goes with our grain the way we want it to. Now, the next thing I need to do is I'm going to put the text on the block, and that will come in right across here. I want to go ahead and put it sideways here on the block. So I'm going to make the text, and then I'm going to turn it 90 degrees so that it fits on my block right here. So the first one we want to set up is our V-carve for the numbers, right? We're going to use a standard 90-degree bit and just go with the standard V-carve settings. We don't need to change any of that. And then we're going to use our 1/4 inch bit to cut the rest of this. The first thing I'm going to do is set the hole for our center. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new toolpath group. This just makes it much easier to switch things on and off when you're trying to save the G code, and you'll see that in just a minute. So I'm going to call this one 1/4 inch bit, and I'm going to drag that toolpath that we created for our hole down into that group. So next we're going to go ahead and do the pocket here for our wing nut. And if you remember, our wing nut was about 1/4 inch, so we want to make this at least 1/4 inch deep so that it doesn't hit our hands when we're putting our hand down on the block. And then finally we'll go ahead and do the cutout for this piece. Now, since I'm using the blue tape method, I don't need to set tabs on this, but if you're using another clamping method, you will want to do tabs on it. So let's do that. Then we're going to save our 2 files. We'll go ahead and turn off the V-bit path and save our 1/4 inch. And then we're going to switch off the 1/4 inch and we're going to save our V-bit path. Now we're ready to cut. Okay, so we've got our little bottom blocks here. I should be able to prop one of these up. Cool. Okay, do a little bit of cleanup on that. Sides look good. Hole did not quite go all the way through, but I'm going to go ahead and drill that out. I need to get that all the way through. Not a problem, not a big deal. Okay, for our top we need to do 2 passes, because remember we're going to do the V-bit here and we're going to V-carve all our numbers into our block, and then we're going to replace this with the 1/4 inch bit, and then we're going to do the rest of our cutout that we need to do. So we take our Z measurement here, we get everything right down in the corner like we like it, and then once we change the bit we have to do it again. So let's go ahead and let this start cutting with the V-bit. I'm going to leave the dust collection off for this part so you can get a look at what's going on underneath. Okay, so when it comes time to reset our Z, the easiest thing to do is to use the rapid position settings in Carbide Motion and go to the current offset, X and Y, and then just reset the Z instead of resetting all of them. Let's bring this down a little. Okay, that looks good, and we'll set our 0. All right, Z is now set to 0. We'll bring this up so I can put the dust collection on, and we'll be ready to go. Okay, so now we've got our tops. These look nice. One of the things I want you to take note of, when I said calipers are important for accuracy, they really are. If you'll notice on this, when I measured my thickness, I managed to set it to where I cut through the material, but not the blue tape underneath. This really does save you a lot of hassle if you use a set of these, so definitely recommend them. So I will probably go ahead and round these over on the edges here, just to make them a little more comfortable on the hands, but those look like they're pretty nice. So the last thing we need to do is, on the opposite side of this hole right here, I need to cut a place for the hex head to go so that this piece remains nice and flat. And I'm going to use one of my centering jigs to do that, and I'll show you how those are set up. Okay, so the centering jigs take advantage of the rapid positioning system in Carbide Create. And if you notice, there's a black dot here on my board. That is where the Carbide Create center is for my waste board. Now, what I mean by that is if you go to rapid position and you choose the center piece, that bit will come right over top of that dot. And it's great because I can come back next week, next year, whatever, and that's still going to be the right position. So here's what that means. Let me move this out of the way. We take a piece of MDF and we bolt it down to where that dot is approximately in the center of the NBF. The next thing we do is we set up a file in Carbide Create where, instead of selecting this bottom corner as our start point, we want the center of the whole design to be the start point. All right? So center to center. And then what we do is we take our original file from the block that we created, and I'm going to just cut a rectangle that's exactly the size of this. That way I can slot this down in the center, and I know that the center of that block is going to be the center of the Shapeoko and of this piece. So everything should line up exactly. And I'll show you what I mean, because I've already got one of these cut out. Like I said, I can come back, a year from now, and center is still going to be center, unless I do something really dumb. So I can just bolt this one down. Okay, get in there. There we go. Okay, cool. So now, when I hit my rapid position center, I am directly over the center of that opening, and I should be able to cut the recess for the bolt head. And it should be exactly the same in every single block. So let's set that up and give that a go. And it's just a little smaller than our bolt, which is fine because we're going to push that in there. And once we put some contact cement on it, we'll go ahead and push that in, and it should line up just fine. Okay, so here's our original block, and here are our new ones. Okay. And you notice that the way these come together, I got a good clearance so I don't get that nut grinding into my hand. That's not good. So now if we undo one of these, you can see we can just pull our top off here, and this is where we wrap our sandpaper around, and when that top comes in, it snugs that sandpaper up nicely, so it always has a nice tight fit, and you've got good room for sanding in there. I also put a strip of leather here on the bottom. You can use leather or cork. Either one works good. It just gives you some good padding for that sandpaper underneath, so that when you're sanding things, you get a good firm contact with all the surfaces. And just put that back on. Tighten the nut again. And you're good to go. And it's nice because, like I said, I can just pick these up and go through my series, and that way I know that each time I'm getting a bit better finish on it with each pass. So while shop projects like this might not seem as cool as doing stuff like boxes, I find they're a really nice opportunity to take some chances and make something that's both functional and attractive. It's nice because this is going to be something you pick up every day and use, and it's good to remind yourself about how creative you are and the kinds of things that you can accomplish. And I find that these do that very nicely on a daily basis for me. So enjoy these, have some fun, take a few chances with them, and we'll see you again next time.